greatest problems facing the environment today is the electric vehicle. Have you heard that? Imagine, if you will, the waste from a single iPhone like this. Now imagine 15,000 iPhones worth of waste. That's how much waste is in a single electric vehicle battery. We're not going to be sending one electric vehicle battery to a landfill, where it will seep into the groundwater and possibly set landfills on fire. We're going to be sending 10.6 million. Well, unless, of course, we recycle batteries. And you may be thinking right now, Ethan, of course we recycle electric vehicle batteries. That's why they're good for the environment. Electric vehicle batteries form a circular economy. If we make 100 EV batteries, we can just recycle those into 100 more EV batteries. Well, with this presentation, I'd like to go a little bit deeper into the state of EV recycling today and show how it is not that rosy. EV recycling is inefficient, unsustainable, and unprofitable. And I'll explain it using this. So let's say we make 100 electric vehicle batteries and we use them and it's time to recycle them. Before we hit the front door of the recycling plant, 95 of those batteries are already in landfills. Now you may be asking, why is that? Well, it's simple. Battery recycling is unprofitable. There's just no profit incentive for people to recycle these batteries. And you may be thinking, okay, well, we have 5 batteries left. How many of those make it out the other end of the recycling process? Only 1.5. The answer to this is also makes sense. Battery recycling is inefficient. But you can see how if we improved this recycling process, if we had a process that was efficient and profitable, we could be cooking with gas. So let's take a look at what processes we currently have for battery recycling. Well, the first one is something called pyrometallurgy. It's essentially building a big pit, throwing all of our batteries in them, and lighting them on fire. As one can imagine, this is not very good for the environment. It's setting batteries on fire. This produces mercury gas, lead, and even sends carbon dioxide directly into the atmosphere. That's right, electric vehicles, which primarily exist to cut carbon emissions, actually have carbon emissions built into their recycling process. So pyrometallurgy, it's very untenable for the environment. But what about hydrometallurgy? This is the second most common method of recycling batteries. Well, that's blasting these batteries with water until they break down to base components, and then sorting through what those components are and seeing, can we use this again? It's better for the environment, but it has a whole nother problem. It is unprofitable, because batteries have to spend up to 14 hours in the hydrometallurgy chamber, and we have to hire people to sort through these parts. So we have 2 processes, but neither of them are really that great. Is there any hope at all for battery recycling? Well, the question I would urge you to ask is, do we have enough time to find hope for this? Because this is only going to become a larger problem. Current legislation is pushing more towards the adoption of electric vehicles. For example, California Air Resources Bureau has the deadline of 2035 by the point where all gasoline vehicles can no longer be sold. The European Union as well, 2035, no more gas vehicles. So these are coming, and this legislation, I don't mean to knock this legislation, it's going to be great for carbon emissions, right? But what we need to be asking ourselves is, are we just trading one form of waste, carbon, for another, which is batteries? And are we prepared to deal with not just the 10.6 million EVs that are already on the road, but the many millions more that will need to be recycled once this legislation hits? Well, with the research that I've done on this topic, I do have an answer, and it's not a good one. It's no. With our current processes, we cannot sustainably recycle the batteries for the EVs we already have on the road. And that really bothers me as an electrical engineer, because EVs have so much potential to change what transportation looks like for all of us. But we can't just pretend like electric vehicles have no downsides, because pretending like transportation has no downsides is how we got into this climate crisis in the first place. This reminds me of a story that my dad told me. As an executive for Interstate Batteries, one of the largest distributors of automotive batteries in the United States, part of his training was riding around in distribution trucks where they would drop off old automotive batteries and pick up old ones to be recycled. And he noticed something a little weird. They were dropping off more new batteries than old ones they were picking up. So he asked the distribution truck driver, why is this? Why are we picking up so few batteries? Even as he asked that, they were pulling into a service station. He saw the racks of batteries to be recycled lying out in the hot Texas sun. Some of them were leaking lead acid onto other batteries in the ground around. Distribution truck driver's answer kind of stuck with him. He said, nobody cares. That's why I think this is a problem worth solving. Thank you.
that's two parts. Whose problem is it and who's going to pay for it?
And that's why this is a problem we're solving, right? Because it really is a catch-22. See, manufacturers would much rather churn out batteries that they already have to meet the demand that we have, and consumers want cars that have longer range. Longer range, in a large part, means more batteries. So it's really a problem for us as citizens of the Earth, because no one can really own the problem. It's much easier to have everyone look the other way and have this waste pile up until it becomes something that we have to have something to deal with. So I would say, who's going to pay for it? Eventually manufacturers, but it's not going to be something that they'll want to do. Unless, of course, we have some methods that will make it easier for battery recycling to service.
Thank you.
Great presentation, really well prepared. I love the storytelling. Nanotech, we built, one of our product lines is for protecting used batteries during storage within the transportation cycle. Have you taken a look at what that ecosystem is? Because there are certainly going to be some barriers to entry on the current solutions. And to Dr. Schrauzer's point, who actually is going to write the check? Is it going to be the current solution providers innovating, or do you think there's going to be new players coming in and innovating and disrupting the current model?
I believe that new players are probably going to take a larger stage in this, and here's why I believe that. Because current battery recycling is so difficult because cells are it's just a bunch of nature mashed together. We have a bunch of different elements and stuff like that, and we combine it in a way that is super, super energy dense, and that's great. But that makes it just as hard to pull all that apart and form it into stuff once they're out again. So new players, for example, we have some firms developing like a water-soluble battery, which will actually dissolve into parts that are more easy to recycle. That shows promise in that aspect as well. So I believe that once a new player can enter with a battery that is more easy to recycle, they can start disrupting the industry, because now they can introduce some sort of ecosystem where your batteries are dead, send them back to us. We get more raw materials out of this than we would need to mine otherwise, and they would likely form their own ecosystem.
Yeah, and I just got back from Ohio last week, and I can tell you the fulfillment center for the used batteries was the size of a Walmart, and it's an enormous problem. And I think you're hitting on it. I mean, just the challenge is figuring out what that ecosystem looks like, buttoning up where the niche is to go after, and I think there's a real shot to build something interesting here.
Absolutely. And if I may, I don't want to cut off its question time, but one other aspect of this problem is the political side as well, because we do have to source batteries from, especially lithium, from political countries that may not necessarily align with the U.S.'s goals. So having a recyclable battery would be a homegrown source of lithium and rare earth metals and other things like that as well. Again, don't want to cut too much.
So if there is a battery that's easier to recycle, you solve that problem. How much of the, residual problem comes from marketing and people being actually willing to recycle their batteries? Because I think, we have an issue with people just recycling their Coke cans and everything. And so how do you, go from having, possibly the solution to actually implementing it and, allowing for consumers to get involved behind that product?
Yeah. I think that this is actually a smaller part of this problem because, you probably haven't had the car that you started with, that you learned to drive in, right? Because you dropped it off at a junkyard or something like that. So cars have a very interesting end of life where they can still provide value for other vehicles by picking them clean. And that could be leveraged in battery recycling. There's only a few places where cars can go, junkyards generally. If junkyards had some aspect in this battery recycling process, then we would have sources for those batteries. They could just say, okay, we take the battery out, you guys keep all the trim pieces, the wheels, whatever, and those batteries could be reintroduced into the cycle. So I think it's a bit of a different problem than just throwing away your phone or something like that, because vehicles have a different end of life than so many other electric products.
Last question.
So you talked a little bit about the political impact. My main question is why now? Why is this problem a problem now?
Well, you see, this is interesting because in Michigan, there's a joint venture plant between China China and Ford building batteries for electric vehicles, and that's actually seeing a lot of like stalling points because political tensions are rising between the US and China and things like that. So we're realizing that if our supply chains are entirely dependent on other countries, then if tensions escalate further, then we could be really kneecapped economically if those countries decide to start introducing sanctions on that. So again, earlier, back in the 70s, it was oil. We had the oil crisis, 73 and all that kind of stuff. But we could potentially be setting ourselves up for a lithium crisis in 2040. So that's another thing that battery recycling would be very able to help out with.
Thank you very much. That was terrific. Next, we'll give the judges another minute to tabulate their scores.